Hi, it's Diane, and I'm very excited for my new book, Daily Meditations for Visionary Leaders. Check it out on my website, visionsapplied.com/meditation. Now, on with the show.
If you are listening to this podcast, it means you are searching for someone who understands you, someone who gets you. You are yearning to be understood and to belong. Welcome to the Someone Gets Me podcast, where we help smart, talented, and sensitive people navigate an often insensitive world. Let's welcome your host, ambassador, author, speaker, and mentor, Diane Allen. Diane has the experience and knowledge to educate and inspire, as she has been there and understands your unique intensities and their challenges.
Hey everybody, it's Diane again with the Someone Gets Me podcast, and I have the most exciting adventure that we're going to go on today together. I'm doing an interview with one of my favorite business women of all time. We've known each other for a long time. She founded a great international business women's community and has built it to this amazing thing, and I am an active participant in it. Not only that, our guest today, Katie Krimitsos, is in my book, The Daily Meditations for Visionary Leaders, because in fact, she is a visionary leader. In her own right, Katie has built an amazing following and inspires people every day. She even helps the men who ask her to. She's not just about women. So welcome to the show, Katie.
Diane, hi. Thank you so much for having me here. That was a sweet introduction. Thank you.
Well, I could say so much more about you, but I think that's succinct enough, and everybody listening to you will get to see just how dynamic and amazing you are.
Well, thank you.
So let's get started with my very first question, and that is, has there ever been a time in your life where you felt misunderstood or like nobody really got you? Since the name of the podcast is Someone Gets Me. Have you ever had that experience?
So I would think that mine actually manifested more in the space of like, is there anyone else like this? Like, am I the only one who kind of does this? And at the moment I can remember that happening was probably in junior high, I think about 7th or 8th grade, where I've always been a very deep thinker, and I could always like make sense and process stuff to make sense of what was going on in the world. And I think by 7th or 8th grade was when I realized, like, I don't think everyone does this like this. I think that this is kind of weird. And I don't know if I put a good or a bad label on it. I just noticed it. And for me, what that was, it was like something that I feel like I've developed over, the 39 years I've been here in this world, which is an ability to get really, really honest with myself and put that, like, process through whatever challenge I was having in a pretty developed manner so that I could make sense of who I then wanted to show up in the world to be. That I would never have been able to articulate that when I was in 7th or 8th grade. But back then it looked like, in 7th or 8th grade, I mean, that was the time of like factions. And if you weren't a cool person, you were like a nerd, and that was like frowned upon. Or, like if you weren't in the cool crowd, like that was the big time of like, you better be in the cool crowd. And something in me, I remember I would not call it bullying by any means, but it was just like, that feeling of uncomfortability. Like, I don't know where I belong here. And yet, like, how can I really be myself and also sort of fit in, but I don't know if fitting in is the right thing. And like, it was that I think a lot of junior high school kids go through. But my feeling was like, I was able to process in my head this sense of, who am I really? And where does that fit in this landscape of these weird factions that happen in junior high? And so literally, I remember, I actually think that it was about, midway through 8th grade. And I remember thinking, I only have to deal with this discomfort of this social weirdness for one more semester, and then it's high school. And in high school, I'm committing to myself to be fully free and me, as crazy or as stupid or as unpopular as that is. And I know that people will fall in love with me eventually. Like, I had that thought in 8th grade. Like, who has that thought, right?
Right.
So, I think that it was that. It wasn't like, it wasn't this, poor me, no one understands this, but it was more like, I don't know if this is a normal thing to be able to process this way.
Right. Which is part of your giftedness, right? But that word was never used and it wasn't around the culture, but you could identify that, wait a second, maybe I'm not doing life like everybody else. And the good thing is you didn't turn yourself into the victim or get all depressed about it. It was more curiosity.
That's a perfect word for it, actually. And it's interesting that you mentioned about the term, because I remember in 4th grade, I'm using air quotes right now, I got interviewed by a counselor who they were doing a gifted program. And I remember being interviewed in the 4th grade for this gifted program. I honestly have no memory whether I actually ended up going into the gifted program or not, but I remember that being a thing, like, are you in the gifted program? And the gifted part actually was a good thing. It meant that you were like uber smart and like, really awesome. And so there was like a level of like pride that I had about even being interviewed, but I don't know if I like blocked it out of my memory if I did. But I remember that thing. Like if I asked my mom, she would tell me like, oh yeah, you went into the gifted program. So I'm like, okay, cool.
That's great. And I think that curiosity, that upbeat personality that you have and just your natural way helped you through those times that were kind of confusing and maybe conflicting and all the mixed messages, which would be the opposite of somebody who just kind of internalizes it all and makes it more of an issue than maybe it needs to be. Because I always say people take what they think is wrong with them. And I say, well, what's right about it?
Yeah. Which is a very big distinction, by the way.
Yes.
And maybe that's what it really was. Maybe it was this like, okay, whatever in this one example of, junior high, like I don't really like the state of how this social hierarchies really work here. And as an 8th grader, I know that doesn't feel good to me. And I know I don't want to fit into them, but I know there's a part of me that probably kind of needs to just deal with it for a little while. So how do I maybe that's what it is it wasn't like, what's wrong with me that I don't fit into these social hierarchies? It was like, well, who am I and where am I and what's the situation? I'm detached from it, but how do I ultimately want to interact in the world that is in front of me, even if it's not the world that I know is in line with what I would want it to be? You know what I mean?
Right. And I'll bet you people told you were wise before your years.
Oh yeah. Old soul. I've always gotten that. You're an old soul, Katie. Right. You're an old soul.
Well, those comments saying it at 8th grade, that shows you're an old soul. That's one of those things where it's like, oh, righty then, you're beyond the typical 8th grader. So that's amazing. So how do you use your gift of curiosity currently, like in your business?
Girl, I don't think there's a part of my life that I don't use that gift in. If I had to boil it down to one major way that I use the gift of curiosity, it is that I'm constantly searching to understand myself better. Constantly. And that then translates into every area of my life. Because ultimately, I think what I have learned over all these decades is that the better I know myself, the more enjoyable my life really is. Because I then know the answers to whatever it is life is putting in front of me. The way that translates in my business is that I am really curious about how I can do a better job every single day living into a mission that's really important to me. That is a very heart-centered mission for me. And as it pertains to my business, what that means is, how can I make the lives of women better through their businesses? How can I translate my gifts of helping women see their own gifts as it pertains to their business, and using this vehicle of a company and using that as an opportunity to show up and evolve into the woman that they need to be, so that they can truly have the abundance in their lives that they really want. So for me, that all starts internally. Like, how can I show up better so that it impacts those women? So it's a constant curiosity of, the way that manifests is, it's a constant curiosity of like, what are the best programs and services or products or events that I can offer that are going to optimize that experience for women? How do I continue to attract the women who resonate with that type of a message, who see their businesses as an extension of who they are in this world, and as a way for them to really live big and kind of do purposeful work in this world? How do I make sure to connect them in a meaningful way so it's different than anything else that they've ever done? So it is a constant, for me in the business arena, it is a constant like experimentation on how I can do that bigger and deeper.
That's beautiful. And I imagine that deeper, bigger part when you said that. I'm like, whoa.
Yeah.
So visionary people traditionally are like the big global thinkers and everything's just kind of out there, and grounding them is a trick. And most of them are not very good at being grounded. Like I spend all day, even though I'm a visionary, grounding people one after the other. Yesterday, I did nothing but ground. Like, oh my God, bring it back. What are we doing? And you happen to be an artist at that. And in fact, you've helped ground me numerous times with just, well, let's just think about it this way. And one of the things that I really appreciate about you that I would like you to share a little bit, just a taste about, is your belief in putting everything on the calendar and having everything scheduled in like your linear way, but that's also visionary, that allows for both. And I think that's a really big thing for anybody, whether they're a business person or, a person at home or a student or anybody, is like, life can get complicated and fragmented and all these things going on, and people can get overwhelmed very easily. And your belief and skill about keeping things on the calendar and color coded and everything really helps ground and dial in people who are very visionary in that ethereal sense.
Yeah.
So are there a couple tips you could kind of share, like that are general, that, obviously necessarily aren't business necessarily, but I know that they cross over into other parts of life. I think that would be really helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll start off by sharing that if curiosity was sort of the ethereal creativity type of my brain, or that the yin of the yin and yang, my yang is focus. Like I've got a grounding skill called focus that I don't know why I have that. I've just always been really good at focusing. And the interesting thing is, in the entrepreneurial space, that's the non-sexy part of business. It's not the one you generally hear about. So, yes, over the course of years, I've developed a number of ways to get really focused so that I can get into action and actually be purposeful and actually produce what it is I want to produce. Now, what you're talking about is how I do that according to my schedule and according to my calendar. And this entire tip I'm about to give is really grounded on the fact that I really believe that true freedom comes, this sounds so geeky as soon as I say it. True freedom for me, you can take this on if you like it. True freedom for me comes when I have boundaries and when I have a blueprint for how I want my life to work. And as that translates to a calendar and like how I schedule my life basically, is that I know for me, if I don't dedicate certain times for the things that I consider valuable in my life, then it's chaos, and I just sort of leave time up to wind, and whatever tends to happen happens. For some people that works really well. My husband tends to be one of those people who he needs to have too much organization on his calendar is it's like restricting. For me, it's freeing because one tip is I start with what are my values? What are things that are very important to me? So that would be spending time with my daughter and actually creating memories during these early years of her life, especially she's 2 years old, and time with my husband, making sure that we have a husband and wife time so that we can continue growing our relationship together. That means time with my family. I don't live near my family. My family's in Arizona, the vast majority of them, and I'm here in Tampa, Florida. Also, my health and fitness is very important to me. That is a value of mine, to make sure that I'm maintaining a sense of healthiness and healthy living, eating well, exercising regularly. And then business, as you heard me say, my business is not just a business. It is a movement for me in my life. And so all of those things, for example, are values of mine. And then what I do is I really believe that the things that we value, we showcase the action of love into those values by putting them on our calendar, by giving them time, right? So if I say time with my daughter is really important to me, and that's a value of mine, deepening a relationship with her. Well, when that translates into time, when am I actually spending time to do that, right? So that to me in a very practical sense means, great, where on my calendar am I actually spending time in each of those areas that I consider important to me? So what that means is, once a week on the calendar is a regular calendar event, a recurring event. I have a date night with my husband every Saturday night. Sometimes we get an extra one in throughout the week. 2 days out of a 5-day work week are 100% dedicated mommy days. So that means that I run this business of mine in 3 days a week and sometimes during nap time. So, but that's how that value translates, is it gets put on my calendar. Then those times of business for me that are just as important as all of those other values, I know exactly when I'm at what times throughout the week I am dedicated to working on business. The impact of doing this is that it translates into how I know where my time is going to be spent, and I know I'm giving energy into each of these buckets I'm saying is important. Now the work gets into how am I optimizing that time so that I can feel organized, I can feel productive, I can feel like all of those areas of my life are getting the attention in the right and most impactful way. So that's just like the groundwork for how I really organize my time.
That is great. And when you're talking about the curiosity and the focus, all I could think about were the two spiritual principles that go together are zeal and order.
That's
what you have, right? Like you have zeal and order. And so we tell people that if you have too much zeal and too much out there, then you need to add a little order. So it kind of, helps ground it a little bit. And if you're just too orderly and you're not having any fun, then we need to add a little life to it. And when you started talking, and as I'm listening to you, I'm seeing these scales go back and forth of zeal and order, and how you are a great demonstration of that. And I think a lot of people can get polarized in one way or the other. So,
yeah,
practicing the skills you teach that way because you live them is a great way to see what that feels like and experience that way. And it may or may not be that person's way, but it's a good way to say, yes, this is good for me. Or we want to be more like your husband, where we're just kind of doing what's coming next.
Yeah.
Both work as long as it works for the person.
Yeah. You have to find your own little equation of what works there on your spectrum. Like, Don't get me wrong. My husband is incredibly organized, but it's in his own way that works wonderful for him. I would feel cross-eyed looking at his, like if I had to live my life through his way of organization, but that works beautifully for him. If I try to squeeze him into my way of, organizing his time, his eyes go bonkers because he's like, oh no, I don't like this. So it's just like, like find what works for you. And again, that gets back to knowing yourself, like know thyself, really spending the time to get to know who you are and what it is good about you and what it is that you want to continue evolving into.
Exactly. Because too many times gifted and smart people and sensitive people try to fit into a place in life or a way that doesn't belong to them. And then there's all this angst and problems and, difficulty. And the whole point of freeing ourselves and knowing ourselves is knowing how to create exactly what it is that works for us by trying out many different things and going, works for me, doesn't work for me, works for me, and then putting it all together. And so that's a big lesson, and that's a big takeaway for all the listeners and everybody, because we need to pay attention. Like, where is that balance for us? And just because you might do it one way and your husband does it a different way, it works for each of you. So it works. And somebody else is going to do something that's maybe completely different or similar or whatever. And as long as it's working, then that's the best thing. I always teach my clients, the question always is not whether it's right or wrong. The question is it working?
Yes. And does it feel right for you?
Right. If it's not feeling right, it's not aligned for you and it's not working, then we need to look at it. But if it does feel right and aligned and it is working, we're good. Move on to the next thing. Don't try to change something because somebody else is doing that,
Yep.
And so that's wonderful. Now, want to change a little bit. Okay. I know that a lot of people that listen to this podcast have goals, and sometimes they don't write them down, or they think they're going to remember them, or they kind of ponder them. But I don't think sometimes people really think they can get to their goals all the time, even though they say they have them, like there's that self-worth or things like that, which is why the know thyself that you believe in so strongly is so important, I think. And so if you had somebody that was kind of struggling with actually writing down their goals or like figuring out what they wanted to do, like I'm really great at helping people get to their vision. And when I suggest things like writing down your goals or doing things that we both have a common belief in doing, often there's this pushback. So what would you say? How do you handle the people who you say, well, let's do it this way. This is the most effective way. And that person might say, well, and you can tell that the resistance is not your idea. It's their inner belief system of some kind.
Yeah.
Do you have a way that you try to help people see that belief system so they can be free of it?
Yeah, once again, I don't believe that there's any one way of doing anything, but I do believe in the power of writing things down, because I think that there's something to be said about literally seeing in front of you the manifestation of what's happening in your head. Most oftentimes what that does is it takes away the power, and or it gives power, like it gives excitement, like a good kind of a power, right? For somebody resistant, it generally that means it's because there's a lot of expectation about what that might mean. Like, oh my gosh, if they actually get it down on paper, that means it's real. And then what happens if I don't make that goal? So instead of trying to play psychiatrist with people, generally what I do is I challenge them just first the short term. Hey, I just want you to try this on. I actually use that term quite a bit. I just want you to try this on. Like, I want you to try this on. I want you to go write this down. And then what I try to do is I try to relinquish the pressure from having to have them do it, because the magic of goal setting is not necessarily hitting the goal. The magic of goal setting is truly what happens when we get put on a course towards a destination. And so generally when somebody is resistant to putting down a goal, there's a lot of like emotional and psychological stuff behind it, but where I really push is just getting them into motion, because motion begets more motion and momentum begets more momentum, and new things are learned along the way. And so what I try to do is simultaneously give them really challenge them to actually just do it and try it on, and release the pressure that whatever that goal might bring up for them. So I'm not trying to, deconstruct why they actually have that pressure. I'm just trying to let them feel it, sit with it, and be released from their feeling that whatever comes up on why they have that goal out there, or what if I fail, or what if I succeed, or what if I do all this sort of stuff. And then literally just work with them on being in the moment during that journey towards that goal. And most importantly, checking into where they are in relation to that goal and seeing if we ever need to move it or pivot it or come up with a new goal. And the beauty of that, the practice of that, is that all of a sudden it becomes in real life a real example of like that the goal isn't the important thing. Like we can, that's not relevant anymore. Cool. Let's change out the goal. Like those who are typically scared of or don't really want to have a goal out in front of them is because it has been put in their heads for some reason, for a gazillion reasons. And we've all had this, that there's no other option than to hit that goal and or to hit it in a certain way. Right. And so if we get to play with that and have a little bit of, kind of joke around with it a little bit and not put so much importance on the goal itself, the actual practice of that in the present moment of moving the goal around, of creating a new goal instead 2 weeks later, in making the goal from this to this, really identifying a pivot and the importance of that. And now, everything is sort of changed, but because they're in motion towards something, their mindset is changing in the moment. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. And the words that come to mind when you were talking, in fact, I wrote them down, was you give them permission to play with it, while you're also offering the emotional safety to kind of free themselves of this self-imposed structure or paradigm that may or may not work, without trying to say, oh, let's focus on that. But here, have a little permission to play a little bit and be a little curious, which is one of your gifts, and giving the safety to do that and the permission to make a change or not make a change or whatever. So that's a perfect balance, I think.
I'll give you a great example of this that encapsulates this perfectly. So I had, probably about a year ago, I had a client come to me, and she and I were working together for about 6 weeks. She said, I want to launch a podcast. I want to talk about this very personal journey that I'm on. And I feel really compelled to talk about this. And it was sort of like a diary according to whatever what was happening in her life. But she felt really compelled to tell the story in the moment of the journey, because she felt so many other women could relate. And it was, right? So we get 3 weeks into it. She's so frustrated because, launching a podcast is not like easy peasy. Like there's there's some stuff that goes into it, right? It's not the hardest thing in the world, but it's definitely not like, oh, let me snap my fingers and all of a sudden I have a podcast. So, she and I were working on podcast design. What would the content be, like having her work on the content? And I don't remember exactly how many weeks it took, but it was a couple weeks into it. And she was coming back on the call with me and she was so resistant. She had not been able to get that content out of her and actually record some shows. And so she just said, I'm having so many blocks with this. And I said, listen, is it worth, how dedicated are you? Like, how strongly do you feel about getting this message out? And she goes, I want to get this message out like crazy. I really want to say this and do this. And I go, how attached are you to the fact that it's a podcast? She's like, what do you mean? I go, well, in prior conversations, you've talked about, hey, if I could just do this in a video, it'd be so much easier if I could just get on and talk. I go, how opposed are you to totally scrapping the podcast idea and just creating a YouTube channel with a couple of videos that you just get to put the video on, hit record, start talking and do it? And she goes, oh, I never thought about that. A week later, not even a week later, like 4 days later, she had her first episode up of her YouTube channel video. It was not perfect by any means, and she knew it. And she just had gotten on the video and just talked, and it was right in line with what she needed to say. And she just got it out, and she came back to me. Mind you, at this point, it had been weeks and weeks and weeks that we had been working, and she could not produce anything, and it was too big of a mountain. And the moment I changed the goal, or I shouldn't say the moment she and I collaborated on like, what could the new goal be? And maybe we're just using the wrong vehicle, but the core of her message and her desire was really ringing true. As soon as we changed the vehicle for that, days, it was up, boom. And like all of a sudden she was like on that path, So if you're willing to play around with it and just stay true to what is right for you and what the true purpose really is, then there are a lot of different ways to achieve the things and to express the things that you really want to do.
That's brilliant. That's a great example too, because it's that ability to be flexible and pivot and stay open. I tell everybody nothing turns out the way we think it's going to turn out. It's always different than we think, and it's always better. And so when we stay married to it has to be this certain way, then we create so many challenges and obstacles instead of saying, what cool way is going to come out, and knowing that what I think today is not really how it's going to be at the end. And so that's a perfect example of it. And now she's free to do what it is just by shifting the delivery system. Because it's also still her value because she's still compelled. So that's brilliant. I love that. That's a great story. Okay. So I would like to talk a little bit about Biz Women Rock. And one of the things I'm kind of curious about, for those of you who are listening who don't know, Katie has the Biz Women Rock Academy and the Biz Women Rock Facebook page and her podcast. And she's amazing. She's all over the world with this stuff. It's great. And it's like, I love it because I love being on your email list, and then I listen to the podcast and I love talking to you. And it's so inspiring to be around somebody who's so infectious and inspiring.
Thank you. And I kind of like women entrepreneurs. Like, I kind of think that we're awesome,
Kind of. Yeah. Right. Kind of. And I think there's a lot of women I know, young as in people in their late teens, early 20s who are following this podcast. And you've been doing your business now for a few years. How many years?
For 4 years.
Okay.
Yep.
I was going to say 4, but I'm like, I think it might be more than that, or it might be less. I don't know. Okay. So I was close. That's good. So 4 years of dedicated work that has yielded an international audience and following. That's amazing. Not just random people. And so I've had a couple girls. In fact, I have 2 right now, girls that I'm working with. One's 15, one's 19. And both of them are kind of like, when I look at the choices of what I want to do with my life moving forward, they can't see themselves in this typical 9-to-5 thing, but they're gifted and they're artists. And so they're not going to, and they think something's wrong with them. So we're kind of working through, no, something's right with you. And let's change the way you see yourself. And so I've turned them onto your podcast, and I've turned them onto your Facebook page because I said, if you want to be like that, go hang out with those people and get the vibe and see where you resonate. And then you can kind of follow that, which is working for both of them. They're like, oh yeah, that's amazing. Right. So when you run into people who are younger than you, either whether it's by age or by they're just starting on the journey, so they're younger than you in that sense, right? If they were pondering making some changes and jumping from this place at their, like I call it familiar pain, to something that liberates them a little bit more. And there's that spot where that faith has to be, and that vision and commitment. What are some things you share with people to help them with that like shift?
Oh, that's a big question. Okay. So once again, I'm going to sound like a broken record this whole time. The ultimate answer is knowing yourself and having a regular practice to have conversations with your soul so that you know what does feel right and what doesn't feel right. And I'll go into what that might actually look like in practical senses here in a second. But basically, this is relevant for anyone who's what I would consider in a transition. So whether you're kind of in the 9-to-5 job world and you really have another passion that you want to do as a business owner, and so you're kind of like, I want to go over that way, or you've even started doing that, but you're kind of in the early years of it. Or you're younger and looking at this world going like, this whole like go to college, get a job thing, like that doesn't look so awesome. So what do I do? Right? Like there's a giant open space, and there's not necessarily like a here's how you do it template. You know, I'm 39 years old now. And when I was younger, that was the template. Go to school, get your degree. If you still don't know what you want to do, go get your master's, which is what I did. Maybe go get your PhD, but eventually get a job and move up the ladder. Like that's kind of the template. And there is no template for anything outside of that, which is terrifying and liberating all in the same sense, which
Amen.
is why, right.
Amen to that, right?
Why it is so important to know yourself. So coming back to this word of curiosity, Elizabeth Gilbert, who's hands down one of my favorite people, she wrote the book, Eat, Pray, Love. Her most recent book is called Big Magic. And she has many amazing concepts in there. First and foremost, for anyone who considers themselves a creative or an artist in any way, like I can't paint worth anything. Like, I have a lot of fun with my daughter doing arts and crafts, but I would consider myself an artist. Like I would consider myself a creative. And I think everyone can really find a point where they can identify with that. I would highly recommend reading this book because it talks about the practicalities of how creativity lives in this world and can live through you. So many great concepts there. But one of the core concepts that she talks about is this idea of following curiosity instead of following a passion. Because we are, we're kind of taught like, oh, just follow your passion and then everything else will follow, follow your passion. And for those of us who are sort of in it, like I am very, very lucky and feel really blessed that like, I know I'm living in my passion every single day. I am one with my mission. It's taken me many years to get to this place. But though I am the person and we are the people who so many people who aren't quite connected to that passion yet are looking at. And so it can feel really disconnecting. Like, well, I don't really know what my passion is. And what if I think I'm passionate about that, but what if it doesn't pan out? And what if, that perfect template of what's supposed to happen in that passion doesn't really work for me? Like it's terrifying, right? So what she recommends is instead of feeling this immense amount of pressure for having to find your passion, just follow your curiosity. Find something that you're curious about and go do more with it. And it doesn't matter what it turns into. Maybe it ends up turning into something that develops into a passion that then develops into a career. Maybe it just develops into something that you really enjoy doing for a little while. And she has this great example of the fact that I can't quite remember if this was actually her story or somebody that she was talking about in her book, but she tells the story about that when she remembers that when she was young, she loved ice skating. She just loved it. Like as a kid, she loved ice skating. But, eventually it sort of petered out and she kind of got busy doing other stuff in life. So fast forward, she's in her 40s and she was like, you know what? She's been having this thought of like, God, she keeps seeing people ice skating. It was like, I kind of need something new to do. So she's like, I'm going to take ice skating lessons. Why not? And she said, I just did it not because I thought I was going to be an Olympic skater, not because I needed to go win any championships in my local community, and not even because I really wanted to, get better per se. I just wanted to enjoy doing it. I wanted to take lessons because I actually just really kind of was curious about me being an ice skater. And that was enough. The fact that she just did that was enough to be able to have a rich experience. In comparison, she talks about how she one of her books, after her big breakout book, which was Eat, Pray, Love, she wrote a novel called The Signature of All Things. And it's a beautiful book. It is nothing like any of her other books. And she says that she ended up writing that book because she followed her curiosity. And the book is about like, it doesn't matter, but it has like a whole foundational story of like botany. Like she's really interested in plants and moss and all this sort of stuff. It's this beautiful metaphor for life. So she said like, she was gardening and she was curious about gardening. So she kind of like got into gardening, and that led into her reading up more about it and just finding a fascination with this particular thing. And all of a sudden she found herself compelled to write this book, which then became part of her profession, right? The point being, follow your curiosity. That is probably the best advice that I could give in the same way that Elizabeth Gilbert gives it, which is, and if you have to go make money and you got to pay your bills, like go find a way to make money and pay your bills and do that, and be curious. If it's in the space of your profession, see if there's a different type of a job that would bring you more joy and that you would be more interested in. And if there's a point at which you just realize like, I ain't meant for this corporate stuff, which I had, then you can make the decision about like, what else am I possibly curious about? What other things might sound cool? And then be courageous enough to go try them, and try them without expectation of them needing to be the end all be all answer to everything. That relinquishing of it needing to be the answer is probably the biggest key to being on the right path to yourself. But it requires that you're constantly internally talking to yourself and like, do I like this? Do I not like this? Is this okay for me? Is this not? Is this something I want to continue giving time to or no? Is it the right time for me to quit? I don't know. When I finally quit my job in 2009, I was just 2 months into helping my business, my now husband, then boyfriend, with his brand new startup company. And I was just sort of helping on the side. And looking back, I probably say a lot like, oh, I quit it so I could go work in his company. That's actually not why I quit. I quit the job because I didn't want to do the job anymore. Like I was sick of corporate. Like I was like, I know that I'm not supposed to be here. Do I think that working in my husband's company, which eventually became our company, like, do I think that that's the answer? Do I think that that's what I want to do forever and how I want to live out my purpose in life? Like, I had no clue. And truthfully, it didn't end up being that, but it ended up being part of the journey that was incredibly impactful that got me here.
Exactly. So it's knowing yourself more and more and more, and being willing to follow wherever the path leads. Because your path did lead from corporate to helping your boyfriend, now husband, to your own podcast and your own whole business and your own whole brand. That had you not taken that first leap on the journey and said, you don't follow my curiosity here, I'm doing this. I know I don't belong here, so I'm going to go to some place I feel like I belong more. And then that's still going to keep shifting and moving, because as we evolve, the way our vision and passion looks on the outside shifts, but the passion remains the same on the inside. So we have to give ourselves permission to have different expressions of the same thing. Your same core belief in helping people and inspiring people has taken many different forms.
Yeah.
And it will take more as you evolve. What's the next thing Katie's going to do? I mean, I don't, it'll be some fun, cool thing, and it will still have that same core value, because that's how you live your life, which I think is the real message that you bring to the world, which is why you're on this podcast, because I think, that's important.
Well, thank you. Steve Jobs had this great quote about how if you want to see the opposite side of this whole concept, which is follow your curiosity and give yourself permission and be courageous enough to take some actions towards that. What's the next best thing, right? Mm-hmm. His quote is talking about like how life doesn't make sense until you can look back at it and then the dots connect, connecting the dots. It only makes sense looking backwards. You don't know it right now. So you just really have to trust. You have to have faith. You have to know yourself so that you know what the next best thing really is. Right. And that's exactly the way I feel right now. And truthfully, I have no doubt that my business is going to look completely different a year from now, 10 years from now. My life will look very different, a decade from now, and then a decade from then. But in this particular moment, it's only now that I can look back and be like, oh, that's where that gift was really enhanced. That's how I'm using this degree. That's why I had to go through that tough moment. Okay. And that's how it's shown up for me now. And it's all working for me really well now. Like, there's no way I would have known that in the moment of me going through it.
Exactly. And that's profound, because a lot of people think they should know as they're doing it. And that's not how it is. We experience it forward. We see it coming together backward. And so it's like one of those, you have to be willing to do that. And I look back on my own life sometimes and go, oh, I do the same thing. Yep. And in the moment, I'm like, oh my word, or, oh, I'm so excited. And then I see it and I go, oh, that's how this is going to play out, in whatever way.
For you listening, think of one of your most challenging moments that you've had, like in the past year. And I promise you, it has to have been like at least 6 months ago, but I would you can even point back further than that. And I almost guarantee that you will see pretty clearly how going through that experience has enhanced who you are right now in some major way. Like maybe it was something that made you get out of a relationship that was not good. Maybe it was something that made you finally accept your body because you had to go through that really low moment of, eating disorder or whatever it is. Maybe it was a moment of you really, having a bad altercation with a family member, but now you've got a really great relationship because you had that clearing. There are reasons for all of these really low moments and biggest challenges in our life. And I really believe that those are all part of what ends up shaping us. But it takes the self-introspection to really allow that to live to its fullest in our present moments.
Exactly. And with a world full of distractions and being reinforced for not introspecting, we end up being in that herd mentality, which keeps fear going. And it's the opposite of true health on every level. And so it's that courageous person who goes and looks within and then follows that in that kind of neat way, which I would call you courageous. And I think a lot of the people listening to this podcast and a lot of my clients are very courageous because we're willing to do that work, knowing the powerful results it yields. It's not just, it's just it gives me goosebumps. And so, okay, go ahead. I'm going to ask you if you're going to say anything else. And yes, you are.
Well, I was just going to say, to actually give a lot more, kind of a feel good, inspiration. We're in such a cool time of age right now where the folks who I feel have celebrity, let's say, people who are known, they're actually really known for being so different, for being so true to who they are. The Oprahs of the world, the Gary Vaynerchuks of the world, the Sarah Blakeleys of the world, these just the Elizabeth Gilberts of the world, they're known and respected because they did not follow a template. And I'm not saying be rebellious for the sake of being rebellious, but it gives me a lot of hope. Okay, the better job I do at creating my own path, that, there's I can find myself amongst those folks. You know what I mean? Not that I have any desire to that doesn't mean anything to me. But for those of you who are hey, they look like they're so quote unquote successful, or that they really get it. The common theme is that they are all incredibly in tune with who they are and what their gifts are and how they show up and translate those gifts into this world. So that always makes me feel good. And instead of seeing yourselves compared to them, they have this and I'm not that yet, see the fact of what their beauty really is this ability to hone in on their gifts, what's so special about them and unique about them and different about them, and turn that around into a way that really gives that gift to the world.
Exactly. And that takes starting from the inside out and allowing your real authentic self to emerge out like kind of a fountain. And it's common with everybody you just mentioned and more. Some of the people in my book, that the daily meditations for visionary leaders, that's why I picked the 30 people from the 4 continents. So that the common theme is every single one of them has gone within and lives their authentic self. And that is as diverse as can be of people. And there is one truth about them, is that they're always on that journey. And if I was to ask those very same 30 people for quotes next year, it's going to be different because it will have evolved and still on that authentic path, which I think is just amazing and great. And I'm so happy you got to be in the book. So we are going to end soon, but I would like you to, I know you have an offer that you would like me to put in the show notes, because Katie's an amazing person to work with and come in contact with. And so she's generous with different things that she can share with you. So talk a little bit about the offer that I'm going to put in the show notes so that people kind of hear from your own perspective and your voice what it's about. And then we'll go from there.
Yeah, so I have a totally free tool called the 7-Day Mindset Challenge. And it's actually circling us back around to a practical way that you can keep in communication with yourself and make sure that you're really clear, like you're talking to yourself on a regular basis. In the world of business, and most absolutely in the general world as well, this idea of mindset is really big for me. Like this idea that I am not a victim, or I am not a passive participant in my life, that I get to create what I want my life to look like. And that's not the norm. Like it's not super easy. Like it's sort of not the natural way that most people are really taught to believe or to think or to show up to life. So I have a 7-Day Mindset Challenge. And while it's definitely tailored towards business, anyone listening can really use it, because what it does is it utilizes the practice of journaling. Right now I'm holding up my journal. Just about every morning I journal, and there's a very specific way that I journal, which is what I go into in the 7-Day Mindset Challenge. And so really what that is allowing my mind to create and to vision what I actually want to see happen and see manifest in my life. And so the 7-Day Mindset Challenge is just really planting that seed of that habit of showing up and journaling every single day, so that and you're given writing prompts every single day so that you can have a really great thing to kind of write about and to feel grateful for, and to kind of go through that process. So you listening have it totally for free, and that link will be in the show notes for you.
Awesome. Thank you, Katie. That's such a wonderful gift. And it's a great way to start actually applying the skills that you and I have been talking about for this whole interview, and see the power of just kind of shifting a little bit and being curious and letting yourself like kind of dial in and focus on a specific 7 days and a specific change, and see how it plays out. And then you can, of course, keep doing it or whatever you need to do, and of course, contacting you and listening to your amazing podcast and all that neat stuff. And I think I'll do for all my meditation podcast, maybe I'll add some meditations that can go with those concepts. That'll be neat.
Love it.
Yes, I know. So as we're about to end this interview, is there anything left in your mind that you would like to say?
No, man, I think we covered a lot.
I think you did. Well, I think
a lot of good stuff.
I think you did too. I think it was amazing. I'm like so inspired. I'm charged up again. So everybody, make sure that you check out Katie's podcast and her website and her Facebook page. I'll put all those links for you in the show notes, so you can just click and find her very easily, and you will be very, very inspired. And so thank you, Katie, for coming on the show. And remember, everybody, keep your face to the sun so the shadows fall behind you, because you will always stay inspired that way. Until next time.
Are you tired of searching for someone who understands you? Join our Facebook group, Someone Gets Me. In this group, you will be able to connect with others who are intense, sensitive, smart, talented, and wanting to be understood. Diane shares her insights and teachings, and you can connect with others. Join today.